Thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So I want to go ahead and just kind of get started with a chance for you to introduce yourself to our viewers. Give us a little bit about your background and why you're running for this position.
Sure. So I am originally from Minnesota, but I moved to Madison about 20 years ago to go to the University of Wisconsin-Madison for undergrad, and then I met my wife at the student newspaper at UW-Madison, and then we decided to go to grad school in Wisconsin too. I went to UW Law School while my wife attended the library school here to get her master's. And I started my legal career in private practice. I was in private practice representing small businesses, municipalities, and school districts. And it turned out that school districts were my favorite clients. Schools almost uniformly are there to do what's best for kids, and that makes representing clients a lot easier when people are there for the right reasons, working toward the same end goal. And that naturally led me to work at the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, where I started while Tony Evers was state superintendent, then was chief legal counsel at the department for Carolyn Stanford Taylor and for Dr. Underly before I was appointed to be judge in August of this year. And so why I want to run for election to a full term after being appointed by Governor Evers, the same reasons that I wanted to be appointed in the first place, which is Governor Evers in his appointment process was looking for public servants who had a handle on the law and who were good people. And I threw in to become a judge because of my dedication to being a public servant. And one story I think of when I'm thinking about what it means to be a public servant, when I was attorney for Governor Evers, he was considering running for governor. And he sat everybody down in a cabinet meeting one day to announce to everybody at DPI he was going to run for governor. And what I would have thought was that it would be a kind of a rah-rah celebration moment, but it was like a funeral. It was quiet and kind of sad, and Governor Evers, then State Superintendent Evers, announced, "I'm doing this because I think it's the right thing to do for kids," and it felt weighty. It felt like Frodo was, taking the ring to Mordor, and so that really stuck with me, and that was a moment where I said, okay, this is what it means to be a public servant. You're not doing it for any kind of personal advancement. You're doing it because it's the right thing to do for people. And ever since then, I don't think I could ever do anything other than be a public servant. And when I heard about what Governor Evers was looking for, I talked to some friends of mine who were judges, some retired judges, and some colleagues who know what it's like to be a judge and what it takes to be a good judge. And the more I talked about it and the more people told me what it entailed, the more I felt like this is my highest and best use as a public servant, is to be a judge in Dane County. And that's why I threw my hat in the ring to be appointed, and that's why I'm running for a full term.
And let's talk too, because you've been serving in this interim position for a couple of months now. Mm-hmm. So talk to me a little bit, now that you've seen what that's like, what have you learned from this position, and what do you think that would bring to a full-time position?
Right. So the things that I've learned, I'm a regular judge just like any other judge. And so we hear all kinds of cases, civil cases, criminal cases. I'm in a civil rotation now, taking over for Susan Crawford's rotation. And a few things I've learned is how critical being a judge is and the decisions that we make are in people's lives. Oftentimes people are there at the hardest moment of their life or the most important part of their life, and every decision that I make is going to set their life on a trajectory, and the weight of those decisions I've felt every single day. Also little things like being kind in the courthouse, being respectful, making sure people are welcome, making sure people feel safe. There's a kind of a choreography to make sure that everybody feels like they belong there and they can be heard in the courtroom. and they're being treated with dignity and respect, and that justice is being done. And then everything in between, the specifics of the law, the kinds of cases that I might not have practiced while I was in private practice or working for the DPI, learning those things, talking with other judges, understanding their wealth of experience. There's 16 other judges in Dane County that have been wonderful resources for me so far, and retired judges that come in and teach new judges have been wonderful resources. So in the few months that I've been here, I feel like I've learned an incredible amount about what it takes to be a judge, and I'm able to apply that every day.
And when I spoke with your opponent, because we sat down on this show a couple of weeks back, she mentioned a big priority of hers. She's an immigration attorney, so that's something we talked a lot about. What do you bring specifically to this role? That was something that she brought up a lot, but what's something that specifically you think makes you unique?
Sure. So in my work with the executive branch at DPI for an executive agency, the DPI, being an in-house counsel, includes all kinds of different legal obligations. Any kind of obligation or work that deals with running a large institution. You've got contract work, you've got HR issues, labor and employment issues, and then policy issues where you are guiding decision makers as to what is the law, what could the law be, what is a policy decision that needs to address a certain problem in society, and how to do that through the legal system. And so there's just such a broad range of legal work and experience that goes into being any kind of in-house counsel, but certainly for an executive agency, that it gave me a broad base of experience to come into the courtroom. But beyond that, working in an executive agency, I also got to peek and kind of get a taste of what the branches of government, how do they interact? The executive with the legislature, the executive with the judicial, and how all three share power and function. And during my time at DPI, I argued in front of the Supreme Court as to what those separations of power should be. I also, while at DPI, had some discussions or some battles with the federal government over federal funding. And trying to secure the funding that Congress had promised to the state of Wisconsin for Wisconsin kids, making sure that that money is delivered without any kinds of impediments to getting those funds to Wisconsin kids. So there's a broad range of legal experience, and also understanding how all of the pieces of our government work and push and pull on each other. I can take that to the bench and make decisions that are informed by that experience, and make sure to kind of preserve the constitutional structure of our government in Wisconsin and in Dane County.
I want to kind of open up our conversation now too to talk about some national issues just surrounding the judicial branch kind of across the nation. So obviously a story that's made national headlines up in Milwaukee is with Hannah Dugan and her alleged helping of a man in her courtroom evade immigration agents. And I asked the same thing to your opponent, but if you were in that situation, how would you have handled that?
Right. It's an issue that our courthouse, the Dane County Courthouse, is thinking about a lot right now. And the judges have control over their courtroom. Right? So we can control who comes in, who's allowed to stay within certain constitutional and legal frameworks. We can keep litigants in our courtroom safe and secure. And outside of the courtroom, that gets trickier, right? Because agents could set up on the street or in the lobby or those kinds of things. And it's an extreme problem when you have folks, for example, coming in to testify in a criminal case, a key witness in a criminal proceeding, who has to debate whether or not to make themselves available to the state to testify because they're worried about what might happen with outside the courthouse. And so it is incredibly important that people believe that they are able to and understand and are actually able to come to the courthouse without fear of some kind of personal liberty interest at stake. And so there are things that we can do as judges, like hold hearings telephonically or on Zoom, so that there isn't that risk of being intercepted on the way to participating in an important court proceeding, and then develop policies, and I can't develop those policies myself as a judge outside of my courtroom as to what happens when confronted in a similar situation. But certainly it's paramount that people participating in court proceedings are able to do so without fear of reprisal, or else the system kind of breaks down.
Do you think Judge Dugan's actions were justified?
I can't tell you what the facts are. I can't tell you what a fact finder would decide. It's not appropriate for me to speculate from afar to say this is exactly what happened and this is what the law would say applies. So I'm not going to speculate. I can say I share in what I perceive to be the intent of Judge Dugan, which is to make sure that people are not harassed or have to consider their personal liberty interests when participating in a court proceeding.
And I want to talk to you now about political violence. It's something we've kind of seen a rise in the recent year. So earlier this year, the Joint Finance Committee rejected the governor's call to fund a force specifically for judges' security. Do you think there needs to be more protections in place for judges in Wisconsin?
The short answer is yes, and it's unfortunate. The threat of violence should not play into a fact finder, a judicial decision maker. It should not be a component in their decision making. In that, in order to make decisions that are lawful, that are just and equitable, and all of those things, a judge should be focusing on the facts, the law, and anything else that the parties will bring in argument. And the threat of violence hanging over proceedings, threat of violence to witnesses, threat of violence to litigants or to the judges themselves, distorts the way that the judicial branch is supposed to function. And so there's a larger problem that should be addressed in that the rhetoric that is being used around the judicial process and the way that people talk about judges and their decisions, and that it's appropriate to threaten or it's appropriate to say this person doesn't deserve to be on the bench or this person deserves some other kind of consequence outside of legal framework, that's not appropriate. That's really the issue that should be addressed, but that is a long-term societal issue that is kind of a bigger, broader conversation. The immediate issue, the immediate concern is if a judge is threatened or if the judiciary is threatened as a whole, what kinds of protections are there to make sure that judges don't have to worry about being harmed? Or any public servant. I mean, not just a judge, not just a legislature, but anybody that chooses to participate in the civic process should feel safe. And so the idea that it isn't a priority to make the judicial branch safe and effective is concerning, and as a judge, my family shouldn't fear for their safety because of the things that I think are the correct things to do on the bench.
And I want to talk to, going back to your campaign a little bit, I want to talk a little bit about some of the endorsements you've received, because you've received several endorsements from state Democratic lawmakers, as well as Dane County Sheriff Calvin Barrett, and your predecessor, who's now a Wisconsin Supreme Court Justice, Susan Crawford. Those are a lot of liberal endorsements. Do you think you'll need, how are you planning on swaying conservative voters for your campaign? Is that a campaign strategy for you?
Sure. So my campaign strategy isn't to focus on liberal supporters. My focus is on Dane County. And Dane County has a lot of liberal representatives, of course, but I am trying to earn the endorsement of any elected official, any human who serves Dane County, first and foremost. And that includes Justice Crawford, who is a nonpartisan Supreme Court justice. She's been wonderful to learn from in the early days and has been very supportive of me as a new judge and as a new political candidate. And so Same thing with Justice Barrett or Sheriff Calvin Barrett, who is a nonpartisan elected official. And then the legislators in Dane County happen to be liberal candidates, but by no means am I running a partisan race, and by no means am I trying to exclude or underrepresent any voter. As a judge, again, nonpartisan race, my role isn't to articulate what my view of society is. It isn't to say, here's what I think the law should be, here's what I think the world should look like. I'm here to say, here is how the law is applied, here's how the law should be interpreted. And so I want anybody to feel welcome in the courtroom, and anybody who comes into the courtroom to feel they're going to get an objective decision from me, a fair, equitable decision from me, and that they will be heard by me regardless of political affiliation.
So you'd be happy with Republican or conservative endorsements in this race as well?
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to kind of talk to, just kind of to wrap up our conversation, to touch a little bit on what you consider your judicial philosophy to be.
Sure. So there seems to be a split in judicial philosophy today between folks who say there's a narrow view of what the law is, or there is a correct version of the law as it applies in every circumstance, kind of this textualist, originalist philosophy of I'm not there to impart any decision making. It's really just call it as I see it. This is what the law says, and I'm going to apply it that way. And then there's a second set of philosophy, and this is a broad generalization, but generally speaking, a philosophy that says take into account all context when making a decision. Take into account the historical context of scientific context. To apply the law in ways that will affect real people, right? So, for example, the Roe versus Wade case being overturned, there were two very distinct decision-making philosophies. The majority opinion was based on what were people in the 1800s thinking about when discussing law regarding abortion. So what were some folks in the 1800s, what did they really mean when to decide this law, to decide the issue of women's health rights? And then there was another set of judges who said, wait a second, a lot has happened since the 1800s. There has been a lot of information, medical advancements. Our idea of what privacy means has evolved. And we should not eliminate all of that knowledge, all of that context, in order to make this incredibly consequential decision. And I put myself in the camp of taking all information, all context, and understanding all aspects of a decision before making that decision, so that you make a decision that you know, when it impacts people's real lives, is the best decision that you can come to. And that's my philosophy.
And I want to ask just kind of one last question here, because obviously your predecessor now sits on the state's highest court. Is that ever a goal of yours to try to get onto that court?
It wasn't even a goal of mine to become a judge up until the appointment process, and so I'm taking this one day at a time. I have not thought further than this campaign. So I would say right now it is not on the top of my mind.
Got this campaign to run first.
Yeah, let's one step at a time.
Well, thank you so much for sitting down with us. We appreciate your time.
I appreciate it. Thank you.